Darius Wade was 41 years old when his ex-wife called to demand her share of a life she had abandoned. For 16 years, Yvette had watched him work. Long hours, modest paychecks, and unfinished investment property she considered an embarrassment. She filed for divorce, calling it a dead-end life and a lack of ambition. She took the row house, the liquid assets, and what she was certain was the better deal. What she left behind was a quiet man with a structural engineer's mind, an unfinished property, and 18 months he intended to use carefully. She didn't know about the 3 developments. She didn't know about the 4th under contract. She didn't know about the 52 FT yacht. But a photo found its way to her, and so she called, calm, warm, rehearsed. And then she said the word that changed everything, share, like it already belonged to her. What Darius did next, she never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun was going down slow over Charleston Harbor. Darius Wade watched it from the deck of the Quiet Tide. 52 feet of white fiberglass and antique wood, anchored a quarter-mile from shore, where the water turned the color of an old copper penny. The sky above was doing something remarkable. Deep orange bleeding into purple, the kind of sky that didn't ask permission and didn't apologize for how much space it took up. He respected that. 16 years of marriage to Yvette. 16 years in a Baltimore row house, with a narrow kitchen and a back porch that needed new boards every spring and a neighborhood that was decent, but not the kind of decent Yvette wanted people to see. He had loved that house. He had loved the work of it, the slow, deliberate project of turning something modest into something solid. Yvette had loved what she imagined the house could become. Then she stopped believing it would. He couldn't pinpoint the exact year things shifted in her. Maybe there wasn't one year. Maybe it was gradual, the way a foundation settles, invisible until the cracks appear in the walls. Or maybe she had understood it and decided she didn't have the patience for it. By the end, her contempt was quiet but total. Yvette was never loud. She had a way of making you feel the distance between you without raising her voice, a particular skill that had very little to do with love. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Irreconcilable differences. A legal phrase that covered a lot of ground without describing any of it accurately. The settlement was clean. He had let it be clean on purpose. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March, cold still, but with the first real suggestion of spring underneath it. Darius was at his desk with the Richmond contract open in front of him, and a yellow legal pad, beside it with 3 columns of handwritten notes. "This setback is wrong," Thomas said, not looking up from the drafting table. "I've been looking at it for 20 minutes. "It's not wrong," Darius said. He did not look up either. "It's wrong, Darius. Check the amended survey, the one dated February." A pause, a sound of papers shuffled with some violence. Then a shorter pause. Claudette Wade was 67 years old and looked like someone who had earned every year of it with intention. Her hair was silver at the temples. Her hands were steady. Her eyes carried the particular calm that only comes from having seen enough not to be rattled by much. She poured him a glass of water before he asked. She waited until he wrapped both hands around it before she let him begin. He told it straight through without stopping. When he finished, the house was very quiet. Claudette sat with her hands folded on the table. She looked at him for a long moment, the way she had always looked at him when she was making sure he was still himself underneath whatever the world had just handed him. "Baby," she said. Don't be angry. Be ready." Darius looked at his mother. He nodded once. The next morning, he was back at Angela's office at 8:45. She went through every photograph without speaking. The email chain first, page by page, reading slowly, then the bank statements. When she finally looked up and pushed her glasses off, he straightened slightly in his chair. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said. "These intervals are deliberate. The amounts are deliberate." She set the phone down. "This isn't a man who gave your wife casual advice. This is someone who understood compliance thresholds and used that understanding to help her take money from a joint marital account over an extended period of time." She paused. "While they were involved, before she filed, 14 months before," Darius said. "That matters," Angela said. "That matters a great deal." She told him her plan. She would file a formal response to Yvette's equitable distribution claim, a clean, direct rebuttal anchored in the settlement language Yvette's own attorney had drafted. But she would file something else at the same time, a discovery request, full financial records 5 years back. Every account, every transfer, every statement attached to Yvette's name. Discovery works both ways, Angela said, not as a joke. Just as a fact, delivered the way she delivered all facts, flat and precise, with no need to underline it. How long before they have to respond? 30 days, possibly 45 if they push. They'll push, but they still have to respond. He thanked her and left. He called Yvette that afternoon. He kept his voice easy and even. He told her he had thought about what she said. He thought it might be useful to meet in person before the attorneys made everything complicated. He suggested a quiet restaurant in Federal Hill, neutral ground, nothing that belonged to either of them. She agreed without hesitation, which told him she had been waiting for the call. They settled on Thursday at 12:30. He arrived 3 minutes early. He gave the host his name. He was shown to a table near the window and sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. Yvette came in at 12:34. Perry Walsh came in behind her. Darius had not been told Perry was coming. He registered it. He did not react to it. Perry Walsh was tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of easy confidence that came from a long habit of being the most expensively dressed man in a room. His suit was charcoal gray and fitted well. He wore a watch that was not subtle. He moved like a man accustomed to walking into places and having them rearranged slightly around him. Darius stood and shook both their hands. He waited for them to sit. Then he sat. Perry did most of the talking. He framed it carefully, never threatening, never direct, but the shape of what he was saying was clear enough. Legal proceedings were costly. They moved slowly. The emotional toll was real. He mentioned attorney's fees twice in the first 10 minutes, each time with a small sympathetic tilt of his head, as if genuinely concerned about Darius's exposure. Yvette nodded at the right moments. She spoke about wanting resolution, about not wanting things to become adversarial. She said the word fair 3 times. Each time she said it, like it was something she had personally invented. Darius watched Perry. He watched the way Perry leaned back with his arm stretched along the back of Yvette's chair. He watched the way Perry's eyes moved around the room at intervals, checking who was there, who might be watching. He watched the way Perry smiled, that slight practiced smile of a man who believed he was the smartest person at the table. Darius ate nothing. He drank his water. He asked 2 short questions and let the answers run long, because people who believe they are winning will always talk more than they need to. When the check came, Perry reached for it without hesitation. A performance. Darius let him have it. He folded his napkin and set it on the table. He stood, and both of them looked up at him. "I want you both to know," Darius said, "that I take this seriously." He let a half-second pass. "I take everything seriously." Perry smiled. The smile said, "Sure you do." Darius buttoned his jacket, nodded once, and walked out. In the parking lot, he unlocked his truck, got in, and opened his thread with Thomas. He typed one word: confirmed. The discovery documents arrived on a Tuesday. Angela called. No email, just a call, which meant it was worth hearing face to face. When Darius got to her office, the paralegal had already organized everything into 3 color-coded folders spread across the conference table. What was inside them was not what Yvette's team had intended to hand over. The private account they assumed was invisible. The merger date after the divorce. The timeline Darius's paralegal had built, clean and chronological, each entry sourced to a specific document. And the thing that stopped Darius's breathing a second time, a date that told him Perry Walsh had been in Yvette's life not for 2 years, but for nearly the full length of their marriage. When Angela called you in person instead of sending an email, it meant something worth hearing face to face. Darius was at her office by 2. The paralegal, a quiet woman named Denise, who moved through paper the way a surgeon moved through a procedure, had already organized everything into labeled folders. 3 of them spread across the small conference table. Color-coded tabs, nothing out of place. Angela sat across from Darius and opened the first folder. The account Perry helped her establish during the marriage, she said, setting a bank document in front of him. You assumed it was closed after the divorce. Darius looked at the paper. It wasn't. It was not. Angela set a second document beside the first. It was merged approximately 6 weeks after your divorce was finalized. The balance, which had grown by then, was folded into a joint account held jointly with Perry Walsh. Darius looked at both documents side by side. He did not speak. That alone is instructive, Angela said, but it becomes considerably more instructive when you look at the dates. She slid a third page across the table. It was a timeline Denise had built, clean, chronological, each entry sourced to a specific document. Darius read it from the top. The account Perry had helped Yvette create, the one fed by 14 months of small, quiet transfers from their joint savings, had been opened while Perry Walsh was still formally listed as her financial advisor. The engagement letter between Yvette and Perry's firm was dated almost 2 years before she filed for divorce. The personal emails Darius had found in the boxes, the ones already intimate in tone, were dated inside that advisory window. The picture was plain. Perry Walsh had used his professional role, a role that came with legal obligations to act in his client's interest and only his client's interest, to help that same client take money from a marital account, redirect it into a private account, and do all of it while beginning a personal relationship with her. That was not bad judgment. That was not a gray area. That was a documented breach of fiduciary duty, with timestamps that left no room for a different interpretation. How serious is the licensing exposure? Darius asked. Significant, Angela said, particularly because he is not a first-time offender. She opened the second folder. Thomas had surfaced it through a contact in the Mid-Atlantic investor community, a man who had crossed paths with Perry Walsh professionally 3 years back and had not forgotten the experience. A regulatory complaint had been filed against Perry 2 years earlier by a different client. The details were different, but the shape was the same. Advisory misconduct, a conflict of interest, a settlement reached quietly before it became public. Perry's license had not been suspended at the time. The complaint had been resolved without formal disciplinary action, which meant it had not stopped him. It had just become a template. Thomas had put the documentation together himself. A printed copy of the public regulatory filing, the settlement notice, and a one-paragraph note in Thomas's handwriting at the top. Second time around, it's different. I'm preparing a formal complaint to the licensing board, Angela said. Everything we have, the timeline, the asset transfers, the prior complaint, the fiduciary breach, structured as a complete submission. She looked at him directly. When do you want me to file it? Darius looked at the documents on the table. When it does the most damage, he said. Angela nodded once. She understood. The complaint was not a first move. It was a closing move, held in reserve until Ovid's legal claim had fully committed itself, until Perry had no soft landing to retreat to, until the most consequential moment arrived on its own. Darius gathered his copy of the documents and tapped the edges against the table to straighten them. Does her attorney know yet what's in the discovery? Her attorney knows what we requested, Angela said. They do not yet know what we found in what they sent us. That's a distinction I intend to preserve for as long as possible. Good, Darius said. He stood and buttoned his jacket. He called Thomas from the parking garage. Angela's got everything. The timeline, the prior complaint, all of it. So we move, Thomas said. Not yet, Darius said. We let her keep thinking she's winning. The call from Claudette came on a Tuesday evening. His mother did not call in the evenings unless she had something specific to say. She reached out to me, Claudette said. Yvette called me this afternoon. Darius was in his truck outside the office within the hour. What Yvette had said to Claudette, and what Claudette had noticed underneath it, was not a woman pressing from a position of strength. It was a woman watching a clock. And buried in the conversation, almost casual, almost unintentional, were 4 words Claudette had written down in her neat teacher's cursive on the notepad she kept beside the fruit bowl. 4 words that told Darius exactly how much time he had and exactly what it was worth. She said they were counting on this being resolved quickly, Claudette said. That things were complicated on their end right now, and that timing mattered. Darius read the 4 words twice. He turned the notepad back toward his mother without saying anything. She didn't say it like a woman who has options, Claudette continued. She said it like a woman watching a clock. Darius sat back in his chair. He let the information settle, not rushing toward a reaction, just letting the full weight of it find its level. Thomas was already standing when Darius walked in, one hand resting on a thick stack of documents spread across the center table, a highlighter tucked behind his ear. Sit down, Thomas said. Darius sat. So Yvette's legal team has been pushing this argument that she contributed to the investment property, Thomas said, sliding a permit copy across the table. Because her name shows up here, secondary party on this construction permit from 2014. You remember filing this? Darius looked at the document. Financing requirement. The lender wanted a second signature to simplify the draw process. It was administrative, right? Completely administrative. Thomas nodded. Her attorneys don't care. They're using it to argue material contribution. But that's not what I called you about. He pulled a second document from the stack and placed it beside the first. Because when I started pulling the full permit history, I found this. The second document was a lease reassignment form. Commercial property. dated about 2 years into their marriage. Darius's name was on it. Yvette's name had a single line drawn through it, initialed and notarized. Darius picked it up and read it once. Then he read it again. She pulled her name off a commercial lease, Thomas said, watching him. A lease you two co-held early in the marriage. And when she did that, the tax liability for the remaining term transferred entirely to you. We're talking about 3 years of liability you carried that should have been split. I didn't know about this. I know you didn't. Thomas crossed his arms. Because it wasn't disclosed to you. It wasn't discussed. It was just done quietly by an attorney. Which attorney? Thomas slid a third page across. It was a printout, a firm profile pulled from a licensing database. The attorney who handled the reassignment had worked at a firm called Harriv and Sills. That firm had a formal professional services relationship with a man named Perry Walsh back when Perry was still doing advisory work through a brokerage affiliate before he went independent. This was 12 years ago, Thomas said. He paused to let that land. Darius did the math without moving. He and Yvette had married 16 years back. The lease reassignment was 14 years ago. 2 years in. Perry Walsh's professional connection to the firm that executed it went back 12 years at minimum, which meant the connection between Perry and Yvette predated the email chain from the boxes by years. Not months, years. The emails I found, Darius said. The ones from 14 months before she filed. Those weren't the beginning, Thomas said. Those were somewhere in the middle. Darius looked at the 3 documents laid side by side on the table. A construction permit with Yvette's name on it as supposed proof of her contribution. A lease reassignment that quietly handed him a tax burden she walked away from. A firm profile connecting the attorney who executed it to a man Darius had been told was a recent development in his wife's life. The full shape of it came together the way a structural failure analysis comes together. Not all at once, but in sequence, each point connecting to the next until the load-bearing lie becomes visible. This was not a woman who grew unhappy and found someone new. This was a woman who had been building a door for years before she used it, moving money, shedding liabilities, maintaining a connection she never disclosed, all while Darius worked 12 and 14-hour days, laying the very foundation she had always planned to step away from. He gathered the documents into a neat stack and stood. Make me a copy of everything. Already done. Thomas pulled a manila envelope from beneath the table and held it out. Angela gets the original set. Darius took the envelope. He held it at his side, his grip easy, his face unreadable. You all right? Thomas asked. Yes, Darius said, and he meant it. He drove to his mother's house without deciding to. The truck seemed to know the way without being asked. They ate pot roast and talked about small things. The neighbor who had finally repainted his shutters. A former student accepted to Howard. Claudette's verdict on her own cooking, delivered with complete objectivity. Darius ate. He listened. He asked the right questions. But Claudette was watching him the way she had watched him since he was 9 years old, quietly from the side, and she let him have the meal in peace. After the dishes were cleared, Darius sat with his coffee and turned the cup slowly in his hands. The manila envelope was in his jacket, which hung over the back of his chair. The kitchen settled into the particular silence that meant everyone in it understood something real was about to be said. Darius set down his coffee cup. It's time, he said. The Baltimore family courthouse smelled the way it always did. Floor wax, recycled air, and the staleness of a building where difficult things happened on a schedule. Darius arrived at 7:45. The hearing wasn't until 9. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, shoes he had polished himself the night before. He carried nothing. Angela carried everything. David arrived at 8:20 with her attorney, a man named Garrett who had silver hair and the practiced confidence of someone who billed $400 an hour and wanted you to feel it. Yvette wore a dark blazer and had her hair pulled back neatly. She did not look at Darius when she entered. Perry came in 2 minutes behind them and took a seat in the public gallery, 3rd row center. He crossed one leg over the other and rested his arm along the back of the bench like a man settling in to watch something he expected to enjoy. Darius noted all of it without turning his head. Judge Holloway entered at 9 sharp, reviewed the case summary briefly, and nodded at Garrett to begin. Garrett built his argument the way a man lays bricks, one flat layer at a time, nothing fancy, all weight. The investment property Darius retained had been a marital asset at the time of the divorce. Its appreciation since the settlement was substantial. He named the figure with deliberate clarity. Yvette's name appeared on a construction permit dated during the marriage, documented contribution. The settlement language had not adequately addressed the property's long-term value. His client was not asking for more than she was owed. She was simply asking the court to correct what the original settlement had left unresolved. It was a clean argument, polished, the kind that worked well when no one looked too far behind it. The judge looked at Angela. She stood. She did not start with the evidence. She started with the settlement document itself, opened it to the relevant page, placed a copy in front of the judge, and pointed to the specific language of its own attorney had used to carve the investment property out of the marital estate at the time of the divorce. She let the judge read it himself before she said anything further. Then she moved to the documents. The bank records came first. 41 transfers over 8 months, each one small enough to avoid automatic flags, each one moving money out of a joint account and into a private account in Yvette's name alone. The timestamps were printed in a clean column down the right side of each page. The total was highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the final sheet. $34,000. Angela placed the email chain beside the bank records. These emails predate the divorce filing by 14 months. They establish that the asset transfers were not spontaneous. They were coordinated, and they were coordinated with the assistance of Mr. Perry Walsh, who was at that time serving as the petitioner's financial advisor. She led a beat pass. That dual role, financial advisor and romantic partner, represents a direct breach of fiduciary obligation. She set down a fourth document, the commercial lease reassignment from early in the marriage. She walked the judge through it with the same quiet efficiency. Yvette's name removed, the tax liability transferred to Darius without disclosure, the attorney who executed it, and that attorney's professional connection to Perry Walsh's former firm. The timeline shows that this connection between Mr. Walsh and the petitioner extends across nearly the full length of the marriage. She paused. This was not a post-divorce relationship. The exit the petitioner executed was planned financially, legally, and personally over a period of years. During that same period, my client was carrying liabilities he was never told about and building assets he was never meant to keep. She formally requested dismissal with prejudice. Then she sat down. Judge Holloway removed his glasses and turned them slowly in one hand. Then he put them back on and looked at Garrett. Counsel. His voice was level. The transfer documentation your opposing counsel has submitted $34,000 coordinated prior to the filing. He tapped the page once with one finger. Does your client have a response to this? Garrett straightened. Your Honor, if I could have a brief moment to confer with my client, you may. 10 minutes. The hallway outside courtroom 4 was long and narrow with fluorescent lights that buzzed just below the threshold of hearing. Darius stood near the window at the far end, watching a pigeon navigate the ledge outside. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Yvette came down the hallway alone. No Garrett, no Perry. Up close, the composure she had maintained all morning had fine cracks running through it. She stopped a few feet away. And what Darius said to her in that hallway, quietly, without anger, without heat, was the most complete thing he had said to anyone ears. Not a confrontation. A measurement. He wanted her to understand something clearly before they went back in. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Yvette came down the hallway alone. Her heels were quiet on the linoleum, but he knew the rhythm of the way she walked. He had known it for 20 years. She stopped a few feet away. Up close, the composure she had maintained all morning had fine cracks running through it. Her eyes were careful. Her jaw was set in the particular way it always had been when she was working hard not to show something. Darius. He turned from the window and looked at her. She exhaled slowly. I didn't think it would go this far. Perry pushed this. The legal action, the whole thing. I went along with it because he said it was straightforward. He said you would just settle. He let her finish. He waited a beat longer to make sure she had. And he spoke. His voice was quiet. No edge to it. No heat. Just words placed where they needed to be. You didn't make mistakes, Yvette. He held her eyes. You made choices. For years. While I was home building something you decided wasn't worth waiting for, you made choices. You moved money. You planned. And the whole time you let me believe in something that wasn't real. He paused. That's not a mistake. A mistake is something that happens. What you did took time. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. I'm not angry anymore, he said. I want you to understand that. I'm past it. He tilted his head just slightly, like a man making sure a measurement is level. But I need you to hear this clearly before we go back in there. I was always this man, Yvette. The man you're looking at right now. I was always him. You just decided you didn't have the patience to find out. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the closest thing to it she was capable of in that hallway on that morning. You wanted your share, he said. This is it. He turned and walked back toward the courtroom doors. He did not look back. Yvette stayed where she was. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside the window, the pigeon was gone. She stood with her arms at her sides and looked at the space Darius had just left. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. Then Garrett appeared at the end of the hallway, moving quickly, looking for her. Both parties returned to their tables at the same time from opposite doors. Judge Holloway entered. Everyone stood. He sat. They sat. He settled his glasses on his face and looked out at the room with the expression of a man who had heard the recess through a thin wall and drawn his own conclusions accordingly. We're back on the record, he said. He folded his hands over the bench. I have reviewed the materials presented this morning, and I've considered the arguments from both parties. He paused. I'm prepared to issue a written ruling within the week. Angela called on a Tuesday morning. No greeting, no preamble, which meant the ruling had arrived and it was worth reading out loud. Darius was in his truck outside a property in Fells Point, coffee going cold in the cup holder, when he picked up on the second ring. He heard paper move. Then her voice, flat and precise. The petitioner's claim for equitable distribution of post-dissolution appreciation is dismissed with prejudice. She kept reading. The court had noted that documentary evidence raised material questions of financial misconduct, warranting review by the appropriate authorities. A copy of the relevant exhibits would be forwarded to the Maryland Office of the Attorney General. She stopped reading. Darius looked out through the windshield at the brick face of the building across the street. "Dismissed with prejudice," he said. "She can't bring this again." Then he thanked Angela. She said, "Don't thank me yet. I've got a regulatory complaint to file." She filed it the next morning. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in sequence, the way structural failures do. One load-bearing point giving way, and another, and the whole thing finding its new and terrible level. The Maryland Financial Licensing Board received Angela's formal complaint against Perry Walsh on a Wednesday. By Friday, given the prior disciplinary record already sitting in his file, they had opened a formal investigation. His license was suspended pending review. His firm placed him on administrative leave the same afternoon the suspension posted to the public record. The public record was the part that moved fast. 3 of Perry's larger clients submitted transfer requests within the first 10 days. 2 more followed the week after. These were not impulsive decisions. They were the decisions of people who had been watching a man manage their money and now had a documented reason to stop. The prior complaint, once buried, was now part of the same public record as the new one. Side by side, they told a story that no smooth phone call could untell. Thomas sent Darius a single text when the suspension posted. "Saw it. Good." Darius read it, set his phone down, and went back to reviewing permits. The real estate venture Perry and Avett had been counting on, the one Avett had accidentally disclosed to Claudette, the one they needed Darius's settlement money to keep breathing, did not survive the spring. Without the capital they had been certain was coming, the project couldn't service its debt or satisfy its investors. The partners called a meeting in March. By April, the entity was dissolved. Avett had left her HR position 18 months earlier to manage Perry's business interests full-time. It had seemed like momentum at the time, a new chapter, a better life, the kind of visible forward motion she had always wanted. Now Perry was under formal investigation. His income was essentially frozen. The business she had stepped into was gone. The row house went on the market in May. When it finally sold, the number came in slightly under the mortgage balance. Avett covered the gap. Darius learned this through Angela, briefly, as a footnote to something else. He did not feel satisfaction exactly. What he felt was closer to recognition. A thing had always been true, and now it was simply visible. 14 months after the hearing, Darius was on the quiet tide. The boat was moored at a private marina outside Savannah in a slip that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the water look like hammered copper. His 5th development project had broken ground 3 weeks prior. He had been approached about a 6th. Thomas was below deck, the sound of something sizzling on the grill rising up through the companionway, accompanied by Thomas's running argument with a piece of fish that had apparently offended him personally. Claudette sat in a deck chair near the stern, with a novel open in her lap and the silk scarf Darius had brought her from Lisbon tied loosely around her shoulders. She was not reading. She was watching the water with the unhurried expression of a woman who had earned the right to simply sit. Angela's email had arrived that morning. 2 lines. Perry Walsh, license revoked. Permanent. Thought you'd want to know. Darius had read it once. He had set his phone face down on the rail. He had not picked it up since. Now he stood at the bow with a glass of bourbon and looked out at the open water, the wide, indifferent, beautiful sprawl of it, and thought about the word Yvette had used on the phone. Share, the way she had said it. Possessive, assured, like a door she already held the key to. He looked at the boat beneath his feet. He looked at his mother in her chair and heard his best friend cursing cheerfully at a grill below him. He looked at all of it. She had been right about one thing. He was going somewhere. She just hadn't been patient enough to find out where.